I wasn't snooping. At least that's what I kept telling myself. That night in our quiet Charleston home, I was looking for Sarah's car keys so I could move her SUV out of the driveway. We'd had one of those heavy, still evenings where neither of us had much to say. She claimed she was tired. I claimed I had work to finish, and we moved around each other like polite strangers. The kind of mood where you hear every creak of the floorboards. Her handbag was sitting open on the kitchen counter. It was one of those oversized leather totes she liked, big enough to swallow half a closet. I figured the keys might be buried under receipts or the mess she always carried. I reached in, fingers brushing past a pack of spearmint gum, the smooth surface of her sunglasses case, the zipper pull of her makeup bag. That's when my hand caught on the sharp edge of something thicker than a grocery receipt. I pulled it out. A concert ticket. Not one, but two, tucked together like a secret handshake. Savannah, big-name artist. A Friday night 3 weeks ago. I stared at the date again to make sure I wasn't imagining it. That was the same weekend she'd been out of town for a 2-day marketing conference in Columbia. She texted me pictures of her hotel room, generic, beige, unremarkable. No mention of music, no mention of Savannah. Under the tickets was a neatly folded restaurant receipt. Different city, same weekend. A high-end Italian place. I scanned the line items, 2 entrees, a bottle of Barolo for $120, dessert for 2. No meeting notes scribbled on the back. No sign it was anything but a romantic night out. The kitchen clock ticked loudly. I just stood there, ticket in one hand, receipt in the other, feeling like someone had tilted the floor beneath me. The sound of the garage door rumbling open made me shove the papers onto the counter. She walked in, balancing a grocery bag in one arm, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, wearing that faint floral perfume I always noticed more when she'd been somewhere she wanted to impress people. "Hey," she said casually, setting the bag down. "You eat yet?" I didn't answer that. Instead, I picked up the ticket and the receipt, holding them up between us. "Want to tell me about these?" For the briefest moment. So quick I almost missed it, her eyes flickered. Not shock exactly, but something calculating, like she was scanning for the right play. Then she exhaled slowly, set her purse on a chair, and crossed her arms. "Why?" she said evenly. "Are you going through my things, Jake?" That's a real violation of trust. The accusation hit harder than I expected. Violation of trust? "Sarah, this is from when you said you were in Columbia for meetings. I'm not imagining that." She gave a short, almost amused laugh like I was the one being ridiculous. "The concert? Colleagues gave me the ticket. I didn't even go. The dinner? Work-related. You wouldn't get it, it was a client thing. 2 entrees? A bottle of wine? Dessert?" I asked. "You know how it is with clients," she said, waving her hand like she was shooing away a fly. "They expect the full treatment. Fancy wine, dessert. None of it means anything. Honestly, Jake, this is why I don't tell you about every little thing. You blow it out of proportion." I felt my pulse in my temples. "So, this was all business?" She rolled her eyes, not in a dramatic way, but with the weary patience of someone tired of explaining something obvious to a child. "Yes, but that's not even the point. The point is that you were digging through my bag instead of just asking me." I stood there, still holding the ticket and receipt, and felt the conversation slipping away from what I'd found to what I had supposedly done wrong. "You barely even talked to me lately," she went on, moving past me to put the milk in the fridge. "Half the time you're buried in work, and the other half you're staring at your phone. Maybe if you paid a little more attention, you'd know what's going on in my life without having to investigate." It was so quick, the way she flipped it. 1 minute I was asking about evidence in my hand, the next I was defending my character. I wanted to press her harder. I wanted to ask why the conference hotel was in Columbia if the dinner and concert were 2 hours away. I wanted to know why she hadn't mentioned either thing in passing if they were so innocent. But her voice had gone soft and disappointed, like I'd hurt her feelings. "I mean, Jake, do you really think I'd do something like that? After everything?" The part of me that wanted answers was still there, but another part, one I didn't like to admit existed, Felt the pull of wanting to keep the peace, to let it drop and avoid whatever fight was simmering. I put the ticket and receipt on the counter. I'm just saying it doesn't look great. She glanced at them without touching them, then met my eyes. Then maybe you should work on trusting me more. The conversation ended there. She started unpacking groceries. I went upstairs, but I could still feel the weight of those papers on the counter, like they were glowing in the dark behind me. And as much as I wanted to believe her, the unease had already rooted itself deep, curling through every quiet moment between us. After that night, I couldn't stop replaying every strange moment from the past few months. It was like once I'd seen the ticket and the receipt, the film reel of our life suddenly had scratches and skips I couldn't unsee. Things that had seemed small, too small to worry about, now felt like they'd been neon signs flashing right in my face, and I just walked past them. I thought about the phone calls. Late-night ones, mostly the kind where her voice would drop into that quieter register she used when she didn't want me to hear. If I came into the room, she'd turn her back, murmur something about just wrapping up with work, and slip into the hallway. Sometimes she'd take her coat with her, step outside, and I'd hear the muted hum of her voice through the closed door. Then there were the trips. Her job had always required the occasional overnight stay. Conferences, client pitches, training sessions, but lately those trips were coming faster, closer together. She'd pack light, travel with just a carry-on, and send me a single photo from her hotel room. The kind with no landmarks, no proof of where she actually was. I'd ask how the meetings went, and she'd give me short answers, already moving on to another topic before I could dig deeper. I remembered one Friday evening when she came home late from a strategy session and set her bag down by the door. When I hugged her hello, there it was. A faint but distinct scent of cologne on her blazer. Not mine. Not any I recognized. She noticed me inhale and laughed it off, saying one of her coworkers had sprayed himself a little too generously in the elevator. I nodded, letting it slide, because what else could I do? Now that little detail gnawed at me. And the phone, God, the phone. Sarah used to leave hers lying around without a second thought. Sometimes I'd grab it to Google a recipe while mine was charging, or she'd hand it to me to show me a funny video. But sometime around early spring, she'd started keeping it face down. Always. Even in the middle of a conversation, she'd glance at it, swipe away a notification without unlocking it, and set it back down like it was something fragile. Once, I picked it up to silence a call while she was upstairs, and the lock screen flashed a preview of a message from an unsaved number. By the time she came back down, she'd already deleted it, because when I looked again, it was gone. Before, she'd text with friends while sitting beside me, screen in full view. Now, she'd tilt it away, her fingers flying fast, then close the app if I happened to glance over. She'd also started skipping the little rituals we used to share. Dinner together had been our thing, even if it was just takeout on the couch. Lately, she'd come home saying she'd already eaten, or she'd claim she wasn't hungry and wander off to the bedroom. Weekends, too, those lazy Saturdays spent grocery shopping or walking by the water, were suddenly filled with excuses. A friend needed help moving, a last-minute client call, errands she didn't want to drag me along for, and I couldn't forget the new things. The clothes, the accessories. A pair of heels I'd never seen before, still smelling faintly of new leather. A gold bracelet she insisted was a gift from the office for hitting a milestone, though she couldn't remember which milestone. Lipstick shades she'd never worn for me, applied on nights she claimed she was meeting coworkers for casual drinks. Individually, none of it was a smoking G***N. But together, the picture they painted was starting to look too clear to dismiss. One night stands out more than the rest. She was in the bathroom, door shut, phone in hand. I could hear the faint ping of incoming messages. When she finally came out, her hair was pulled back like she'd been getting ready for bed, but her cheeks were flushed. She smiled at me, but it was a distracted smile, the kind you give someone while your mind's still elsewhere. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just work stuff," she said quickly, moving past me toward the bedroom. Later, when she was asleep, I checked her phone. Nothing. Not one text in the thread from earlier, like the conversation had been wiped clean. I started noticing smaller, almost invisible shifts in her language. The way she referred to we when talking about the office felt different, less about her department, more about some smaller, tighter circle. The way she'd use the phrase, "don't wait up," with a practiced casualness. Even her silences were different, weighted in a way I hadn't felt before. One afternoon, she came home carrying a paper coffee cup from a cafe I didn't know she liked. The sleeve had a name scribbled on it. Not hers. "They messed up the order," she said with a shrug when I asked. But I could see her thumb covering part of the writing as she tossed it into the trash. The more I pieced these fragments together, the more I felt that sinking sensation in my gut. Like I was watching a play where I knew the ending, but I still couldn't look away from the scenes leading up to it. And the worst part? There was no single moment I could point to as the breaking point. Just a dozen little cuts, each one too small to scream about on its own, but together enough to bleed something dry. At night, lying next to her, I'd stare at the ceiling and try to remember when it all shifted. Had there been a fight I'd forgotten? A slow drift we'd both ignored? Or had she simply stepped off the path we'd built together without ever telling me? The ticket and the receipt had cracked something open. These memories, lined up like dominoes, were pushing it wider. I didn't have the full truth yet, but the pattern was forming, and it was getting harder to pretend I didn't see it. It was a corporate event in Atlanta. One of those evening functions held in a hotel ballroom where the air smells faintly of polished wood, champagne, and the unspoken competition of networking. Sarah had insisted I come along this time, saying it would be good for me to see her world. The ballroom itself was something out of a lifestyle magazine. Panoramic windows stretching from floor to ceiling, giving a sweeping view of the city lit up like a galaxy. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over round tables draped in white linen, each one set with polished silverware that reflected the glow. Waiters in black vests moved through the crowd with trays of wine glasses, their movements silent and practiced. Sarah was in her element. She moved from one cluster of colleagues to another, greeting them with hugs, clasping hands, leaning in with that smile that seemed designed for exactly this kind of room. She looked stunning. Navy dress, gold earrings, hair pinned up just enough to show the line of her neck. Watching her from across the room, I could almost believe we were fine again, that the doubts of the past few months were just in my head. But then the conversation happened. I was standing near the windows, sipping my drink, when I heard her voice carry over the low hum of chatter. She was in a circle of people. Some I recognized from previous events, others strangers. I caught her laughing at something. Then her tone shifted just enough for the words to land sharp. "Oh, please," she said with a teasing drawl. "I could leave my husband any time I wanted." The group chuckled, that awkward kind of laugh people give when they're not sure if a comment is a joke or a confession. But before I could process what she'd said, her friend Lisa, blonde, sharp-witted, the kind who always had a little too much to drink at these things, leaned in and added, "And I'd gladly take him if that happened." The laughter this time was louder, but not lighter. I saw shoulders stiffen. A few people froze mid-sip, others glanced at me, then quickly away as if they'd just remembered something urgent across the room. My chest tightened. The words themselves were enough. A half-joke is still a thought spoken aloud, but it was the way she said them. No hesitation. No glance over to see if I was in *T. Just the ease of someone who had no fear of the truth slipping out. I set my glass down on a nearby table and stepped closer. I didn't interrupt, didn't make a scene. But I caught the way Sarah's smile faltered for a split second when she noticed I'd been close enough to hear. The rest of the evening blurred. She tried to loop me into conversations, introducing me to people with the kind of enthusiasm that felt a little too deliberate. I nodded, smiled where appropriate, but every laugh and handshake felt hollow. At one point, I excused myself and stepped out into the hallway, leaning against the cool wall as I tried to steady my breathing. The noise from the ballroom was muffled here, just the faint echo of music and clinking glasses. That comment, her comment, kept replaying in my head. Not just the words, but the tone, the casual confidence of it, the lack of any trace of affection in her voice. And then Lisa's follow-up, delivered with that drunken boldness that often strips away politeness and leaves only what people really think. I'd suspected before. I'd pieced together fragments. But this was different. This wasn't a hint or a theory. It was the kind of thing you can't unhear, the kind of public slip that confirms more than it reveals. When I returned to the ballroom, I kept my distance. Sarah glanced my way a few times, her smile tightening each time our eyes met. I stayed until the end, because leaving early would have been the kind of reaction she could twist later, turning my hurt into oversensitivity, my suspicion into paranoia. The drive back to the hotel was quiet. She scrolled through her phone at red lights, humming softly to the music as if nothing had happened. I kept my eyes on the road, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. "You were quiet tonight," she said eventually, not looking up from the screen. I didn't respond right away. When I did, my voice was even. "You said something back there, about leaving me anytime you wanted." She laughed lightly. "Oh, come on, Jake. That was a joke. You know how Lisa is, she eggs people on. It's all in fun." "Didn't sound like fun," I said. She glanced at me then, her expression halfway between irritation and dismissal. "You're reading too much into it. Seriously, let it go." But I couldn't. That night, lying in bed beside her, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the looks on the faces of the people in that circle. How some had frozen, others looked away. How the room felt just a little too still after her words landed. Those reactions weren't for a joke. They were for the truth dressed up in laughter. I knew, then, that the suspicions weren't just suspicions anymore. They were certainties waiting to be proven in black and white. And whether she meant to or not, she just handed me my first undeniable piece of evidence. The night after the corporate event, the air in the house felt different. Not colder exactly, just charged, like the air before a storm. Sarah moved around the kitchen unpacking a grocery bag she'd picked up on the way home, humming softly like everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. I'd spent most of the drive back from Atlanta replaying her words in my head. I could leave my husband anytime I wanted. I'd heard them in her voice, with that casual confidence, and I'd seen the way people reacted. I'd seen the little crack in her composure when she realized I was close enough to hear. I decided on the ride home that I wasn't letting this pass. Not like the ticket, not like the late-night calls or the disappearing messages. I had proof now, not just from the ballroom, but from what I'd been quietly collecting for weeks. When she closed the pantry door, I said, "We need to talk." Her hands froze on the cereal box, then she turned slowly, that guarded expression sliding into place. "Okay," she said lightly. "What's up?" I stepped into the living room and gestured toward the couch. "Let's sit." She hesitated, then followed, setting the box on the counter. She sat at the far end, one leg crossed over the other, arms folded, closed off from the start. I reached for the folder on the coffee table. Thick manila, edges worn from the number of times I'd opened it in private. "I've been keeping track," I said, my voice even. Her brow furrowed. "Keeping track of what?" I opened the folder and began laying items out on the table one by one, like pieces in a case file. Bank statements, hotel receipts, parking camera stills, **TS of messages. Her eyes darted over the papers, but she didn't reach for them. "Jake, what is this supposed to be?" "This," I said, tapping the first set of receipts, "is from Savannah. Same weekend you told me you were in Colombia. This is the hotel bill from that same weekend, different city, same dates." I slid another page forward. "These are the parking records from the garage across the street from the restaurant on that receipt I found in your bag." Her arms tightened across her chest. "This is insane. I cut her off. "This," I continued, placing my phone on the table and sliding it toward her, "is a **T of a conversation between you and someone named Michael, making plans to meet, matching dates and times to the trips you've told me were for work." She stared at the screen, then let out a dry laugh. "Michael is a friend. We've known each other for years." "A friend you meet at hotels?" I asked. "It's not like that," she said quickly. "Then explain what it is like." Her gaze dropped to the table. "We just talk, sometimes grab dinner. It's nothing physical." "Nothing physical?" I leaned back, keeping my voice calm even though my chest felt tight. So you spend nights in hotels with him for conversation? Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. It's not what you think, Jake. You're twisting this into something ugly. I shook my head. I'm not twisting anything. I'm lining up dates, receipts, and messages. And the picture they paint is clear. For the first time, her composure faltered. She shifted in her seat, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I didn't mean for it to happen. My throat went dry. For what to happen? She hesitated just a moment too long. For it to get this far. I didn't think you'd find out. There it was. Not an apology for the act itself. An admission she hadn't expected to be caught. I stood in that ballroom last night and listened to you say you could leave me any time you wanted. I said quietly. Do you have any idea what that felt like? Her eyes flicked up to mine, but she didn't answer. It wasn't a joke, I continued. The people in that circle, they didn't laugh like it was a joke. They looked away like they'd just heard the truth. Her voice was barely above a whisper. It was a joke. No, I said. It was the truth dressed up as one. Silence settled between us. She stared at the folder, at the neat rows of evidence, but didn't reach for any of it. Finally, she said, I don't know what you want from me. Do you want me to say I'm sorry? Do you want me to tell you I'll cut off contact? Because I will. I'll end it. We can move past this. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Sarah, I've been giving you the benefit of the doubt for months. I've listened to the explanations, the deflections, the blame shifting. But the truth is right here on this table. And you still won't say it. Her jaw tightened. Say what? That you've been unfaithful. She flinched, her shoulders curling in like she'd been struck. I don't think of it that way. You don't have to, I said. I do. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock in the hallway ticked softly, each second stretching. Finally, she stood, smoothing her skirt with hands that trembled slightly. I need some air. I didn't move to stop her. I just watched as she walked to the door, slipped her shoes on, and left. When the door clicked shut, I looked back at the table, at the receipts, the photos, the messages, and felt the kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than lack of sleep. The kind that comes from finally seeing the full picture and knowing you can't unsee it. A few weeks later, the county courthouse felt nothing like I imagined it would. The building itself was plain. Brick exterior, double glass doors. But the air inside was thick, humming with the restless energy of people waiting for judgment. Some sat stiffly in the rows of wooden benches. Others whispered with lawyers, eyes darting to the big clock above the clerk's desk. The smell of paper, dust, and strong coffee hung in the air. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside my attorney, David. He was the kind of man who spoke softly but carried an unshakable confidence. The kind that came from decades of walking into rooms like this with all his preparation already done. In front of him was a neat binder filled with the timeline of Sarah's actions, receipts, bank statements, hotel invoices, parking garage logs, and screensh *TS of the messages with Michael. Sarah sat across the aisle with her lawyer, a younger woman in a sharp gray suit. Sarah was dressed in muted tones, hair pulled back in a low bun, her expression calm but her hands twisting slightly in her lap. She didn't look at me, not once. When the judge entered, we all rose. His voice was steady, his manner brisk, and there was no hint of patience for drama. This wasn't TV. It wasn't about emotional speeches or surprise witnesses. It was about evidence, timelines, and the law. David went first. His voice never rose, never wavered. He laid out the facts in chronological order, flipping pages in the binder with the precision of someone who'd practiced this moment 100 times. On March 14th, he began. My client's wife informed him she would be traveling to Columbia for a work conference. Evidence will show she instead traveled to Savannah, Georgia, accompanied by a man identified as Michael. We have hotel receipts under her name, corroborated by parking camera stills showing her vehicle entering the garage adjacent to the hotel. The timeline of her arrival matches the timestamp on messages arranging the meeting. He continued, piece by piece, lining up each trip, each work dinner, with the corresponding evidence that placed her somewhere else, or with someone else. It was methodical, undeniable. Then he brought up the corporate event in Atlanta. We will also present testimony regarding a public statement made by Mrs. Whitman during a company function, wherein she implied she could leave her husband at any time. The remark was followed by a colleague's comment suggesting an interest in Mr. Whitman. Multiple witnesses observed this exchange. While my client does not seek damages for public humiliation, this statement supports the pattern of willful disregard for the marriage. Sarah's lawyer objected to the relevance, but the judge overruled. David ended with the conclusion I already knew was coming. Given the volume and clarity of this evidence, we assert that Mrs. Whitman willfully breached her marital obligations and request that the court grant my client full ownership of the marital home, all joint savings, and shared property, while denying alimony. Then it was Sarah's turn. Her lawyer stood and spoke in a softer tone, framing Sarah's actions as misunderstandings and misinterpretations of her professional relationships. She acknowledged the trips but claimed they were dual-purpose travel, business blended with social time. The hotel stays, convenience, the dinners, networking. When it came to the messages, her lawyer suggested they were taken out of context. The Michael in question, she said, was a longtime friend and confidant who had been a source of emotional support during a challenging period in the marriage. I watched Sarah's face as her lawyer spoke. Her gaze stayed fixed on the judge, her posture straight, her mouth set in a neutral line. If she felt shame, it didn't show. When the judge asked Sarah if she wanted to speak, she hesitated before standing. Her voice was steady, though quieter than I expected. "I never intended to hurt Jake," she said. "The choices I made were mistakes, but they were never meant to end our marriage. I regret how my actions have been interpreted, but I still believe they've been exaggerated to make me look worse than I am." Interpreted. Exaggerated. Even here, even now, it was about the framing, not about the truth. When both sides finished, the judge leaned back in his chair and scanned the papers before him. The silence in the room felt like it stretched for minutes, though it was probably only seconds. "Based on the evidence presented," he began, "the court finds that Mrs. Whitman's conduct constituted a willful and repeated breach of marital obligations. This court will grant Mr. Whitman full ownership of the coastal property located at 428 Harbor View, sole possession of all joint savings and investment accounts, and full rights to all shared physical property. Mrs. Whitman is denied alimony." The sound of the gavel striking wood was sharp, final. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. David leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "It's done." Sarah's lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder. She nodded once, stood, and began gathering her things. I caught her eye for the first time that day. She didn't look angry, just tired, but she didn't say a word. Outside the courthouse, the sunlight felt strange. Too bright, too warm for the heaviness I carried. David shook my hand firmly, told me he'd follow up with the final paperwork, and then walked off toward his car. I stood on the steps for a moment, watching people come and go, each carrying their own private battles inside. My fight was over in the legal sense, but the real ending, the kind that lives in your chest and lets you sleep at night, would take longer. Still, as I walked down those steps, I knew one thing. The truth was no longer something I had to convince myself of. The court had put it on record. The marriage was over, and for the first time in months, so was the pretending.